In a moment that captured both heartbreak and hope, a mother wolf collapsed right in front of a quiet house, and what happened next when her baby intervened left everyone in tears. On an ordinary day in a small, peaceful town, life was taking its usual course, until an extraordinary event unfolded that would forever change the lives of those who witnessed it. At the break of dawn, as soft light filtered through the trees, a commotion stirred near an old modest house at the forest's edge. Neighbors were startled by a heartbreaking sight. A mother wolf, regal and protective, had collapsed right in front of the home. It was as if the very force of nature had paused to reveal a moment of raw vulnerability, where even the fiercest creatures could succumb to overwhelming weakness. The mother wolf had always been a symbol of the wild, a creature whose powerful presence commanded respect and whose protective instincts kept her pack safe. But on that fateful morning, something was terribly amiss. Collapsed and barely conscious, she lay on the dewy grass, her eyes fluttering weakly as if pleading for help. The suddenness of her collapse sent shockwaves through the onlookers. Whispers and gasps filled the air as neighbors rushed out to see what had happened. Amid the unfolding chaos, a tiny, unassuming figure emerged from the shadows. A baby wolf, small and trembling, yet filled with an unyielding determination. Instead of fleeing in fear, the cub instinctively approached its fallen mother. In a scene that was both heart-wrenching and profoundly moving, the baby wolf began to nudge its mother with gentle, desperate licks, as if trying to awaken the fading light of life within her. The tender gestures of the cub, so full of innocence and unwavering love, captured the hearts of everyone present. Tears streamed down the faces of the witnesses, not just out of sorrow, but also from a deep sense of hope sparked by this display of filial devotion. The incident quickly rippled through the community, touching everyone from local residents to wildlife experts. While some were initially overwhelmed by the tragic collapse of a creature so integral to the wild, others found solace in the small cub's courage, a reminder that even in the bleakest moments, nature holds within it the power to inspire and heal. As emergency responders and animal welfare groups arrived at the scene, a plan was quickly set in motion to rescue the mother and provide the care she desperately needed. This video unravels the stunning sequence of events that began with a single act of nature's cruelty and was transformed by the brave, tender actions of a baby wolf. It's a story that transcends the boundaries of tragedy and hope, offering a glimpse into the profound bonds that connect all living beings. In the early hours of that fateful morning, the quiet suburban calm was shattered by an unexpected commotion at the edge of the woods near a modest family home. As dawn crept in and the first soft rays of sunlight began to illuminate the landscape, several neighbors noticed a strange figure lying motionless on the dewy grass. Approaching with cautious concern, they discovered that it was not a stray pet, but a majestic mother wolf, once the formidable guardian of her pack, now collapsed and vulnerable before their very eyes. The scene was surreal, a stark juxtaposition of nature's raw power and its fragile vulnerability. The mother wolf, known to roam these woods with grace and authority, lay sprawled on the ground, her breathing shallow and labored. Her eyes, usually alert and full of life, fluttered weakly as if fighting to cling to consciousness. The cause of her collapse was not immediately clear. Some speculated that it might have been a sudden illness or exhaustion from a long journey, while others whispered of the harsh realities of the wild. But as the gravity of the moment sank in, the focus shifted to the most heart-wrenching part of the scene. From the shadows of the trees emerged a tiny figure, a baby wolf, no more than a few months old, its fur still soft and unblemished, with wide, innocent eyes filled with both fear and determination. Instead of scattering in panic, the cub hesitantly approached its fallen mother. The sight was both heartbreaking and awe-inspiring. With delicate, trembling movements, the baby wolf began to nudge its mother, first with gentle licks along her side, and then more persistently, as if trying to rouse her from the brink of unconsciousness. Neighbors and passers-by who had gathered in a quiet circle watched in stunned silence as the cub's tender actions unfolded. It was as if the little creature, despite its own vulnerability, possessed an unyielding resolve to protect the one it loved. The baby's soft whimpers and the careful way it pressed its nose against its mother's fur conveyed a message of hope, a silent plea for life, and a testament to the power of familial bonds. Many of those present found themselves overcome with emotion, their eyes brimming with tears as they witnessed a scene that encapsulated both nature's cruelty and its capacity for compassion. Meanwhile, as news of the incident spread quickly through the local community, animal welfare experts and wildlife rehabilitators rushed to the scene. Emergency responders carefully approached the duo, mindful of the wild instincts that still pulsed within the injured mother and the delicate state of the cub. Their priority was to stabilize the mother wolf, ensuring she was safely transported to a wildlife rehabilitation center for urgent care, while preserving the precious bond between mother and cub. The rescuers' calm, methodical actions provided a stark contrast to the raw, spontaneous emotions of the onlookers. It was clear that every minute counted. The fragile state of the mother demanded immediate attention to prevent further deterioration. Back at the scene, as the rescuers worked, several witnesses recounted what they had seen. An elderly neighbor, who had long been fascinated by the lore of the local wildlife, murmured that the mother wolf had always been a symbol of strength for the community. "I've seen her before," she said softly, prowling proudly at dusk, guiding her pack with fierce determination. "To see her like this, it's as if a part of the wild has been broken." Her words resonated deeply with many, highlighting the emotional impact of witnessing nature's might reduced to helplessness. For the baby wolf, the situation was even more precarious. The cub, still unaccustomed to the harsh realities of a life in the wild, seemed to instinctively understand that its mother was in trouble. The way it followed closely behind the rescuers, occasionally nuzzling against them for reassurance, spoke volumes about its attachment and innate need for care. In that moment, the baby wolf became a powerful symbol of hope, a living reminder that even in the face of tragedy, the spark of life could ignite change. Throughout that day, while the injured mother was being carefully loaded into a transport vehicle and taken to specialized care, the community remained glued to the unfolding drama. Conversations, both whispered and fervent, spread through social media and local news outlets. Many expressed their heartfelt sympathy, sharing that the cub's brave intervention had touched them profoundly. The story was evolving beyond a simple act of rescue. It was becoming a narrative of resilience, love, and the unbreakable bonds that define the natural world. Jack, a local hiker who had been among the first to witness the scene, began documenting the events in his journal. Every detail, from the trembling movements of the baby wolf to the gentle, desperate licks it offered its mother, was recorded with the hope that this story might inspire others to look beyond the surface and recognize the profound beauty in acts of compassion. In the aftermath of that heart-rending morning, as rescuers carefully transported the injured mother wolf to a wildlife rehabilitation center, the story of the miraculous bond between her and her baby took on a new, deeper meaning. The community, already moved by the tender scene, began to focus on the baby wolf's role, the small cub whose instinctive compassion had shone through in the midst of tragedy. While experts worked to stabilize the mother, local wildlife rehabilitators, along with compassionate volunteers, made it their mission to ensure that the cub would not be separated from her. Their goal was to preserve the profound connection that had unfolded before everyone's eyes. Over the following days, animal experts monitored the mother's condition and observed the baby wolf's behavior closely. Remarkably, the cub, whom many began to call Hope, exhibited extraordinary resilience. Despite her own youth and vulnerability, Hope seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. Whenever her mother was tended to, she would stay close by, often curling up near the shelter where rescuers had set up temporary care for the injured animal. Her actions were filled with a quiet, unwavering loyalty that moved everyone who observed her. Wildlife biologists explained that in wolf packs, the bond between mother and offspring is fundamental for survival, but rarely is it witnessed so openly by humans. Hope's gentle gestures, a soft nuzzle, a careful lick, or simply staying within a comforting distance, spoke of a deep, emotional connection that transcended the natural instincts of the wild. Local news quickly picked up the story, and the tale of Hope's devotion spread throughout the community. Social media became awash with photos and video clips of the baby wolf, with many viewers moved to tears by her unspoken plea for her mother's recovery. People shared personal stories of loss and the healing power of empathy, and the story of Hope and her mother came to symbolize the potential for renewal in even the most broken of circumstances. Meanwhile, at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, dedicated caregivers worked tirelessly to nurse the mother wolf back to health while ensuring that Hope remained a constant source of comfort and companionship. Dr. Rivera, the center's lead veterinarian, noted that while the mother's condition was serious, the presence of her cub appeared to have a positive, calming effect on her. In many species, the bond between parent and offspring is critical to recovery, she explained. Seeing her cub by her side, displaying such unyielding love, can stimulate a healing response, both emotionally and physiologically. Her observations lent scientific support to the idea that Hope's actions were not simply instinctual, but carried an emotional depth that might actually promote recovery. As the rehabilitation process continued, community members organized vigils and fundraising events to support the center's efforts. Local schools, inspired by the story, held discussions on wildlife conservation and the importance of empathy towards all living creatures. These events not only raised much-needed funds, but also transformed a heart-wrenching tragedy into a unifying call for action and understanding. However, the situation was not without its challenges. The delicate nature of wildlife care meant that separating the cub from her ailing mother for any extended period could risk breaking the bond that had become so vital to both their emotional well-being. Animal welfare experts cautioned that any decision to relocate or treat one without the other would require careful consideration, as disrupting their connection might lead to additional stress or even long-term behavioral issues. This logistical and ethical challenge added a layer of complexity to the situation, forcing rescuers and community leaders to weigh the immediate needs for medical intervention against the importance of preserving this extraordinary bond. Within the community, reactions were mixed. While many were moved by Hope's display of loyalty, some skeptics questioned whether the emotional narrative being constructed was an idealization of a natural process. "Animals will always follow their instincts," one local resident remarked. "This is what they do when they're stressed." Yet for most, the story of Hope was more than an explanation of instinct. It was a testament to the transformative power of care. As Hope continued to stay by her mother's side, her presence served as a reminder that compassion can bridge the gap between the raw brutality of nature and the healing influence of human empathy. During a quiet moment at the rehabilitation center, while Hope gently nuzzled her mother's side, a volunteer named Lisa whispered to a colleague, "Look at her. It's like she's saying, 'Don't give up, Mama. I'm here, and we're going to get through this together.'" Her words captured the essence of what many in the community had come to believe, that this was not just a story of survival, but of an unbreakable bond that could inspire healing far beyond the forest. In his personal journal, Jack, one of the first witnesses to the scene, wrote extensively about the emotional impact of the experience. He reflected on how, in that moment of despair, the baby wolf's gentle actions had rekindled a long-forgotten belief in the power of kindness. His writings, raw and poignant, became a rallying cry for those who believed that every act of compassion, no matter how small, had the power to change lives. Thus, as the rehabilitation process continued, and as the community rallied around the story of Hope and her ailing mother, the narrative evolved into a broader commentary on empathy and the transformative potential of caring for the vulnerable. The once tragic encounter had blossomed into a symbol of hope, a promise that even in the face of devastating cruelty, love and compassion could light the way to recovery. As Jack continued his careful efforts to treat Spirit's injury, a series of subtle clues began to emerge that hinted at a shocking truth beneath the surface of the already heart-wrenching rescue. One late afternoon, while re-examining the area where he had found the deliberate claw marks and torn pendant, Jack noticed something unusual. Near a fallen log on a narrow, overgrown path, he spotted a small, glinting object partially buried under a layer of damp leaves. Its appearance was incongruous amidst the natural detritus of the forest, a tiny metallic fragment that shone even in the diffused light of the canopy. Intrigued, Jack carefully dug around the object and unearthed what turned out to be a fragment of a high-tech tracking device. The device was sleek, its surface marked with a series of numbers and a small logo that hinted at advanced technology. This discovery sent a jolt of disbelief through him. A tracking device in a wild animal. The notion was both startling and ominous. Jack's mind raced. Had someone deliberately implanted this device into Spirit? The meticulous nature of the injury on Spirit's side, combined with the precise claw marks, suddenly took on a new, chilling dimension. It wasn't merely an accident or the result of a stray encounter with a predator. It now appeared that Spirit's suffering might have been orchestrated. The idea that a human hand had interfered so deliberately with a wild creature was a revelation that shattered any semblance of natural misfortune he had clung to. Determined to uncover the full truth, Jack decided to retrace his steps along the trail where he had found the tracking device fragment. With Spirit still weakly following him, a silent testament to his struggle, Jack embarked on a careful journey deeper into the forest. His flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a narrow path that he hadn't noticed before. The trail, marked by subtle disturbances in the underbrush and the lingering scent of machinery, led him to a secluded clearing that looked almost out of place amidst the ancient, unspoiled wilderness. In the center of the clearing, a row of discarded equipment lay scattered, small portable devices, fragments of electronic parts, and a few torn pieces of fabric that looked deliberately hidden. It was clear that this was not a random accident of nature. Someone had been here, using modern technology to track or possibly control local wildlife. The implications were staggering. Jack's earlier assumption that Spirit's injuries were merely the product of nature's harshness now crumbled in the face of evidence pointing toward human intervention. As he documented the scene with his camera, Jack's thoughts churned with a mix of anger and sorrow. He recalled the images of Spirit's pained eyes and the meticulous nature of the claw marks, details that now resonated with a sinister new meaning. Whoever was behind this had not only wounded a creature that had already suffered so much, but they had also used technology as a means to monitor or perhaps manipulate the animal. This revelation, as horrifying as it was, provided the missing link in the puzzle that Jack had been trying to piece together. Meanwhile, word of Jack's discovery began to spread through the local community. A local investigative journalist, known for her hard-hitting reports on wildlife crimes, caught wind of the story. She arranged to meet Jack at the clearing the following day, where he shared his findings and his mounting suspicions that Spirit's injury was part of a larger and organized scheme. The journalist's interest lent further credibility to the investigation, and soon, additional evidence started to surface. Witnesses reported strange, unmarked vehicles and unfamiliar faces near the forest's edge, and several local animal welfare groups confirmed similar instances of deliberate injuries in other animals. Back at his camp that night, as Jack sat alone under the vast starless sky, he couldn't shake the image of the tracking device fragment. It glinted in his mind like a cold, hard reminder that cruelty could be systematic and premeditated. He reflected on the irony that while the wilderness is often perceived as a realm of natural brutality, it was sometimes the cruelty of humans, hidden behind layers of technology and secrecy, that inflicted the deepest wounds. In a moment of quiet resolve, Jack vowed that he would not let Spirit's suffering go unanswered. He began to plan his next steps, gathering more evidence, reaching out to wildlife experts for a comprehensive analysis of the tracking device, and connecting with local law enforcement to ensure that this evidence would not be dismissed as an anomaly. The revelation that Spirit's injury might be part of a broader, deliberate network of exploitation transformed his mission from one of rescue to a full-scale crusade against human cruelty in the wild. This unexpected twist, that an injured wolf had been fitted with a tracking device, turned everything on its head. It not only exposed the possibility that Spirit's suffering was not an isolated event, but also revealed a dark undercurrent of technology-fueled exploitation that threatened the very integrity of the natural world. With the evidence now mounting and the stakes higher than ever, Jack's journey took on an urgency that promised to expose hidden truths and bring long-overdue justice to the vulnerable. In the days following Jack's startling discovery of the tracking device fragment and the hidden equipment, the emotional and investigative atmosphere surrounding Spirit's case deepened dramatically. The revelation that someone had deliberately interfered with the injured wolf not only shattered Jack's previous assumptions about natural misfortune, but also sent shockwaves through the local community. The idea that human malice, cloaked in advanced technology, was at work left many reeling and forced a re-evaluation of what it meant to live in a world where cruelty could be so precisely orchestrated. Back at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, the mood was somber yet determined. Dr. Rivera, the center's lead veterinarian, examined Spirit's wound once more, now with a renewed urgency. The deliberate nature of the injury and the unexpected technological evidence had shifted the focus of treatment from routine care to a guarded, almost forensic observation. "We must be cautious," she told her team. "This isn't just about healing a wound, it's about understanding the extent of the cruelty inflicted." Her words resonated deeply with the caregivers, who now saw their work as part of a larger mission to uncover and expose a sinister undercurrent running through the local exploitation of wildlife. Among the community, reactions were equally divided. Local animal welfare activists and compassionate citizens were outraged. At several town hall meetings, impassioned speakers decried the deliberate harm inflicted on Spirit as not only an act of cruelty against one animal, but as a symptom of a broader system that treated nature as a commodity to be manipulated. "This is a travesty," one activist cried. "If someone can use technology to monitor and inflict pain on a creature in the wild, what does that say about our society's respect for life?" Their voices, filled with anger and sorrow, rallied many to demand swift and decisive action against those responsible. Yet, there were also voices urging caution and methodical investigation. A small group of local officials, concerned that jumping to conclusions might jeopardize the gathering of irrefutable evidence, called for a measured approach. "We must let the facts speak for themselves," one council member argued. "While the evidence is troubling, we need to ensure our actions are based on comprehensive, indisputable proof before we take any legal or punitive steps." This debate between immediate retribution and a careful, systematic inquiry only deepened the community's internal conflict and set the stage for a larger, more complex investigation. Jack, for his part, felt the weight of the revelations deeply. The discovery of the tracking device had transformed his mission from one of rescue into a crusade for justice. His initial empathy for Spirit had blossomed into a burning need to expose the deliberate cruelty behind the injury. Late at night, while sitting in a makeshift camp near the clearing, Jack would pore over the photographs, scribble notes in his journal, and replay the images of the precise claw marks and the torn pendant. The images haunted him, each detail a stark reminder that the exploitation was systematic, premeditated. "This isn't random," he often murmured to himself. "It's a message." His determination to dig deeper grew with every passing moment. As Jack communicated with local law enforcement and shared his findings with wildlife experts, he began to see a pattern emerging. Former employees of the implicated millionaire discreetly reached out, revealing similar incidents of deliberate harm to other animals. Their testimonies painted a grim picture of a network of exploitation hidden beneath a veneer of affluence and philanthropy. These revelations stirred both public outrage and a creeping fear among those who had long trusted in the integrity of local power structures. The personal toll on Jack was profound. Once a solitary hiker who found solace in the indifferent wilderness, he now carried the heavy burden of responsibility, not only for Spirit's recovery, but also for the broader fight against human cruelty. In private, he confided in a close friend, "I've always believed nature was harsh, but I never imagined that human hands could be even more cruel. I can't let this injustice go unanswered." This raw vulnerability further humanized his journey and galvanized support from various quarters of the community. Even within the online sphere, where discussions about Spirit's case had already sparked an outpouring of support, the tone shifted after Jack's discovery. Posts under hashtags like "Justice for Spirit" and "Expose the Cruelty" began to trend, with users sharing similar experiences and calling for increased transparency and accountability. The digital community's fervor provided Jack with moral support and a renewed sense of purpose, reinforcing his resolve to see the investigation through to its bitter end. Amidst these diverse reactions, The injured wolf itself became a symbol, a living testament to both nature's fragility and its remarkable resilience. Every time Spirit limped forward with renewed determination, it served as a silent indictment of the cruelty inflicted upon him. For many, his struggle was not just a personal tragedy, but a mirror reflecting the systemic failures of a society that often turned a blind eye to exploitation. Thus, as the investigation advanced and the community wrestled with conflicting perspectives, Jack's journey became emblematic of a larger battle, a fight to hold powerful individuals accountable and to restore a measure of compassion and justice to a world scarred by neglect. The weight of each new revelation, each emotional outburst, and every shred of evidence collected deepened the resolve of those who stood alongside him. The clash between methodical inquiry and emotional outrage had reached a critical juncture, setting the stage for the final confrontation. As Jack and Officer Ryan delved deeper into the mystery behind Spirit's deliberate injury, new subplots began to intertwine with their investigation, each one adding complexity and urgency to the unfolding drama. What had initially appeared as a singular, tragic case of a wounded wolf pleading for help now began to hint at a broader network of exploitation and even potential cover-ups involving human interference in the wild. One of the first unexpected developments came when a local wildlife technician, Miss Carla T., reached out to Officer Ryan. Carla had been monitoring wildlife patterns in the region for several years and mentioned that she had noticed a peculiar trend. Several animals in nearby areas exhibited similar, precisely inflicted injuries. In her data, these injuries weren't random. They followed a specific pattern that suggested the use of a consistent method, a method that might indicate deliberate tampering. Carla's technical insights added a scientific layer to the mystery, and her observations hinted at a systemic problem that extended far beyond Spirit's case. Around the same time, whispers began to circulate among local communities about a reclusive figure known only by a pseudonym on online forums, the Shadow. This mysterious individual was rumored to be involved in various clandestine activities in the region, including illegal wildlife operations. Some online users claimed to have seen glimpses of the Shadow near known poaching grounds, while others speculated that he might be connected to the deliberate use of technology, such as the tracking device fragment Jack had previously discovered, to control or monitor local wildlife. These murmurs added an element of suspense and suggested that Spirit's injury might be a deliberate act by a person with far-reaching influence, rather than an isolated incident. Simultaneously, a local investigative journalist, Ms. Marlowe, began publishing a series of articles about wildlife exploitation in the area. Her reports, though initially focused on broader trends, soon zeroed in on Spirit's case as a particularly egregious example of deliberate cruelty. In interviews, several former employees of a notorious local businessman, whose public image was that of a philanthropist, hinted at a history of using advanced technology and ruthless methods to silence or control animals, and even people deemed unprofitable. Marlowe's articles, replete with leaked internal memos and anonymized testimonies, connected Spirit's specific injury with a larger pattern of exploitation. Her work added a critical, hard-hitting perspective that galvanized both local activists and community leaders to demand a thorough investigation. Within the realm of animal welfare, the story of Spirit was resonating deeply. Local rescue volunteers, already moved by the stark images of the injured wolf's suffering, began to notice parallels in other cases. Reports surfaced of similar, precisely inflicted wounds on other animals, all suggesting a methodical, deliberate cause. A seasoned volunteer named David from the regional shelter recounted how, in his years of service, he had rarely seen such uniformity in injuries. This emerging evidence not only bolstered the theory that Spirit's suffering was orchestrated, but also raised urgent questions about the extent of the cruelty in the region. Amid these unfolding subplots, Jack himself felt increasingly isolated by the mounting revelations. His nights, once filled with solitary hikes and personal reflections, now became a series of meticulous field investigations. Equipped with a digital camera, a notebook, and a GPS device, Jack retraced Spirit's steps along trails where subtle clues had been recorded. Each new set of footprints, each fresh scratch on a tree trunk, was documented with the hope of uncovering the identity of the person or network behind the deliberate attacks. These efforts began to reveal a potential pattern. The injuries and disturbances seemed to converge near specific, rarely used parts of the forest, areas where illegal activity was rumored to be rampant. Local community meetings, already a battleground of conflicting opinions, took on a new urgency as these subplots emerged. At a town hall meeting, impassioned voices clashed over whether the deliberate harm to spirit was a random act of cruelty or part of a systematic operation run by powerful, corrupt individuals. One activist declared, "If we ignore these patterns, we're letting our wildlife, our community be exploited in silence," while a cautious council member urged that they must first secure irrefutable evidence before taking drastic measures. This debate underscored the community's growing division between immediate, emotion-driven retribution and the need for a careful, methodical investigation. Online, the story was igniting discussions on social media. Posts under hashtags like #HawkSaveSpirit and #DocsExposeTheCruelty began trending locally, with individuals sharing personal anecdotes of mistreated wildlife and suspected illegal activities in the area. These digital conversations not only spread awareness, but also pressured local authorities to take the emerging evidence seriously. Many community members were galvanized by the idea that spirit suffering was a microcosm of a much larger issue, a systemic exploitation hidden beneath layers of wealth and power. Moreover, an unexpected twist came when a local historian uncovered archival records that detailed similar incidents from decades past. In old newspaper clippings and forgotten municipal reports, there were accounts of deliberate injuries inflicted on wildlife during a period when a powerful local tycoon had been implicated in illegal animal trafficking. These historical documents provided a chilling context. The exploitation of the wild was not a new phenomenon, but one that had been revisited over time by those seeking profit and control. This historical dimension added weight to the contemporary evidence, suggesting that the cruelty behind spirit's injury was part of an enduring, if hidden, tradition. Thus, as Jack binds Officer Ryan and the community gathered every shred of evidence, from technological clues and eyewitness testimonies to historical records and anonymous online messages, the narrative of spirit suffering began to form a complex tapestry of human exploitation and systemic cruelty. The convergence of these subplots underscored a pressing need for justice, a call for the community to confront a dark underbelly of human actions that had long been concealed in the shadows of wealth and influence. In the weeks that followed Jack's discovery of evidence suggesting deliberate human interference in spirit's injury, the investigation took on an increasingly personal and emotionally charged dimension. Jack found himself caught between the raw brutality of human cruelty and the fragile beauty of nature's resilience, a tension that not only challenged his role as a rescuer, but also forced him to confront the limits of his own empathy. Late one evening, as Jack sat alone in his makeshift camp deep in the forest, the sounds of nocturnal life mingling with the soft patter of rain on his tent, he reflected on the disturbing evidence he had gathered. The precise claw marks on the ground, the torn piece of fabric that hinted at deliberate neglect, and the remnants of a tracking device all pointed toward a systematic act of cruelty that went far beyond a random mishap. As he scribbled his thoughts in his weathered journal, Jack couldn't help but feel a deep, gnawing sense of responsibility. The images of Spirit's pained eyes and the calculated nature of the injury haunted him, blurring the lines between nature's indifferent brutality and the deliberate malice of human actions. This internal conflict was compounded by the reactions of those around him. Local wildlife experts, who had initially treated Spirit's case as a routine rescue, began to express shock and disbelief at the possibility of deliberate human involvement. Dr. Rivera, a seasoned veterinarian at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, confided in Jack during one of their quiet discussions. "I've seen many injuries in the wild, but nothing so precise. It's as if someone had a specific intent to send a message, or perhaps to use the animal as a pawn in something bigger." Her measured words struck a chord with Jack, reinforcing his growing conviction that this was not just an isolated case of neglect. Meanwhile, Community members who had heard of the unfolding investigation found themselves torn between empathy for the suffering animal and a hardened skepticism born of years of witnessing human indifference. At a local town hall meeting, voices clashed fiercely. One impassioned speaker argued that if humans were capable of such calculated cruelty, then every innocent creature might be at risk. "It's not just about spirit," she cried. "It's about every animal that has ever been exploited by those who see nature only as a resource." Yet others cautioned that emotions should not override facts. "While the evidence is troubling, we must remain objective," countered a local official. These debates echoed the inner turmoil that Jack experienced, torn between the desire to let his emotions drive him and the need to adhere to the cold, hard evidence. As Jack delved deeper into the investigation, he began to notice that his own personal history was intricately intertwined with the case. Memories of his childhood, when he had once felt abandoned and misunderstood, surfaced with painful clarity. The struggle that Spirit was enduring seemed to mirror Jack's own inner battles. In a rare moment of vulnerability, he confided in a close friend, "I never imagined that witnessing such cruelty could awaken feelings I'd long buried. It's as if Spirit's pain is speaking to every forgotten part of me, a reminder that no one, not even in the wild, should suffer in silence." This confession, shared in the quiet of a late-night phone call, deepened his commitment to the cause, fueling a determination to expose the dark undercurrents behind the deliberate injury. In the digital realm, the case had ignited a flurry of debate on social media platforms. Hashtags like "Your Justice for Spirit" and "Expose the Cruelty" began trending locally, with individuals sharing personal stories of animal exploitation and raising questions about the ethics of those in power. While many found solace in the collective outcry, others warned against letting the digital hysteria cloud the need for rigorous investigation. Jack spent many sleepless nights reading through these posts, feeling both uplifted by the solidarity and burdened by the raw emotions that spilled over every comment. The online discourse, replete with both praise and vitriol, underscored the polarized nature of the issue, an issue that cut to the core of how society valued life, whether human or animal. The tension also extended to the practical aspects of the investigation. As Jack coordinated with Officer Ryan and local law enforcement, he encountered resistance from some officials who were wary of pursuing a case that implicated influential figures in the community. One officer, during a particularly charged meeting, remarked, "We have protocols to follow, and while the evidence is disturbing, we must ensure that our actions are measured." This insistence on procedural caution only amplified Jack's frustration. He felt that in the pursuit of bureaucratic correctness, the true voice of the suffering animal, Spirit's desperate plea for help, was being drowned out by legal formalities and red tape. Caught between these conflicting worlds, the emotional, raw outpouring of a community in distress and the cold, methodical demands of legal and procedural norms, Jack began to experience a crisis of purpose. Was his mission purely to rescue a wounded animal, or had it morphed into something far larger, a quest for systemic justice and accountability? The realization was both empowering and paralyzing. Every new piece of evidence, every conversation with experts, and every heated online discussion drove home the point that the exploitation of the vulnerable was not an isolated incident, but a systemic failure that needed to be addressed on multiple levels. In these tumultuous moments, Jack's journal became a lifeline, a repository for his thoughts, fears, hopes, and the mounting resolve that urged him to act. He wrote about the paradox of nature, how the wild, often seen as indifferent and ruthless, could sometimes become a canvas for human cruelty, and yet how that same wilderness could also offer a path to redemption if one had the courage to seek the truth. His words were raw and unfiltered, a testament to the internal battle raging within him, a battle between the desire to simply provide immediate aid to Spirit and the imperative to expose the broader network of exploitation that had inflicted such deliberate harm. In the midst of these complex interactions and emotional dilemmas, one truth emerged with undeniable clarity. The struggle for Spirit was not just about saving one animal, it was about challenging a system that allowed cruelty to thrive unchecked. Jack's resolve hardened, and he vowed to see the investigation through no matter the personal cost. Every step he took was fueled by the conviction that no life should be treated as disposable, and that the painful scars of human malice could only be healed by a relentless pursuit of justice. As the investigation deepened and the mounting evidence of deliberate human cruelty became undeniable, Jack found himself on the brink of a final confrontation that would decide the fate of Spirit, and possibly the entire community's approach to wildlife protection. The revelations from the tracking device, the meticulous claw marks, and the torn remnants of a pendant had all pointed to one chilling truth. Spirit's injury was not a mere misfortune of nature, but a calculated act of cruelty. Now the time had come to confront those responsible and to decide on the course of justice. One damp, overcast afternoon, Jack organized a covert meeting with Officer Ryan, local wildlife experts, and representatives from the animal welfare groups who had been closely following the case. They gathered in a secluded clearing near the edge of the forest, the very site where the disturbing evidence had first been discovered. The atmosphere was thick with tension as the group laid out their findings on a weathered wooden table. Photographs, digital recordings, and detailed field notes were spread out, forming an unassailable mosaic of evidence. Jack's voice, filled with a mix of resolve and sorrow, broke the silence. Every mark, every piece of evidence we've collected confirms what we feared. Spirit was deliberately injured. This wasn't a random accident. It was an act meant to send a message, to exploit and control the wild for profit. His words were met with murmurs of agreement and grim expressions. Officer Ryan, whose transformation from detached law enforcer to empathetic advocate had lent the investigation an emotional urgency, added, "We cannot let this cruelty continue unchecked. It's not just about Spirit, it's about every vulnerable creature in these woods. We have a duty to expose this exploitation and ensure accountability." At that moment, the conversation took an unexpected turn. A local investigative journalist, Mark Rivera, who had been tracking similar cases in the region, arrived at the clearing with a thick envelope of documents. With a steady hand, he opened it to reveal internal memos, confidential testimonies, and financial records implicating a notorious local businessman with a polished public image but a dark, exploitative underbelly. "These documents show a pattern," Mark explained, his voice low but insistent. "This isn't an isolated incident. There's a network of exploitation here that's been operating for years, using advanced technology and ruthless methods to inflict harm on wildlife, and even on people." The revelation sent a ripple of shock through the group. The evidence painted a damning picture. The businessman, whose name had long been associated with philanthropy, was in fact connected to a series of deliberate acts of cruelty aimed at suppressing the wild. The documents indicated that his operations had used tracking devices, like the one found on Spirity, to monitor and control animals for profit. The damning nature of this evidence galvanized the group. Jack's heart pounded as he realized that their fight was not just to save Spirit, but to dismantle a system that treated life as expendable. In the heated discussions that followed, the group debated the next steps. Some members, fueled by raw emotion, called for immediate legal action, a public outcry that would bring the businessman to justice and send a clear message that exploitation would not be tolerated. "We must make an example of him," argued one passionate activist. "If we don't act now, more innocent lives will be sacrificed for profit." Others cautioned that while retribution was necessary, a methodical, independent investigation was crucial to ensure that all evidence was documented and that no wrongful accusations marred the pursuit of truth. Amid the debate, Officer Ryan, whose voice had become both a pillar of authority and a source of emotional inspiration, stood up and addressed the assembled group. "Our goal must be twofold," he said firmly, "to hold those responsible accountable and to rebuild trust in our community's ability to protect the vulnerable. We will file formal complaints with local authorities using the overwhelming evidence we have gathered, and we will also form an independent task force to investigate the full extent of these exploitative practices." His measured words cut through the emotional turbulence, laying out a clear path forward. The group slowly began to reach consensus. A plan was drafted. The evidence would be handed over to a coalition of legal and wildlife experts, and a public statement would be issued to alert the community to the systemic nature of the abuse. At the same time, a dedicated team would be formed to continue gathering testimonies and monitoring any further signs of deliberate cruelty in the forest. The decision, though fraught with potential risks and political backlash, was embraced with a sense of solemn determination. Each member of the group recognized that this was not only a fight for justice for Spirit, but a stand against a broader system that devalued life. As the meeting drew to a close, a heavy silence fell over the clearing. The storm outside had begun to ease, and the first hints of a break in the clouds promised a new day. In that quiet, reflective moment, Jack looked around at his comrades, at Officer Ryan, at Mark Rivera, at the activists and wildlife experts, and felt a surge of collective resolve. They were united by a shared belief that the cruelty inflicted on Spirit was unacceptable and that every living creature deserved dignity and protection. With the evidence in hand and a clear plan in place, the group vowed to move forward with unwavering determination. Jack, filled with both sorrow for what had been done and hope for what could be achieved, declared, "Today we take a stand not just for Spirit, but for every life that has been shattered by exploitation. Our work has just begun, and we will see it through until justice prevails." In that climactic moment, as the wind quieted and the clearing bathed in the soft glow of emerging dawn, the community's call for justice became an unbreakable promise. The task force was set to embark on a relentless pursuit of the truth, ready to expose the hidden network of cruelty that had haunted their wilderness for far too long. In the wake of the dramatic confrontation and the shocking revelations about Spirit's deliberate injury, new subplots began to weave together, expanding the scope of the investigation and deepening the bonds among those involved. What initially started as a solitary rescue mission had evolved into a community-wide quest for truth and justice, one that connected Jack Dye, Officer Ryan, and local wildlife advocates with individuals whose lives had been touched by similar acts of cruelty. One of the first new threads emerged when Jack received a call from a local university professor, Dr. Evelyn Torres, an expert in animal behavior and environmental ethics. Dr. Torres had been following the case closely through social media and local news reports. Intrigued by the possibility that Spirit's injury might not be an isolated incident, but rather part of a broader pattern of exploitation, she offered to collaborate with Jack. During a meeting at a nearby research facility, she presented data from her own field studies that indicated a disturbing rise in precisely inflicted injuries among several wildlife species in the region. "There is a pattern here," she explained, "one that suggests these injuries are not random accidents, but may be linked to deliberate human intervention." Her scientific perspective added credibility to Jack's suspicions and helped bridge the gap between raw emotion and empirical evidence. Simultaneously, local animal welfare organizations began to join the investigation. Sarah, a dedicated volunteer who had already documented several instances of suspicious wildlife injuries, reached out to Jack with additional photographs and field notes. She had been tracking reports from concerned citizens who claimed that other animals in the area exhibited similar, strangely patterned wounds. Together, Jack and Sarah cross-referenced their data, finding alarming similarities that hinted at a coordinated effort to inflict harm on vulnerable creatures. Their collaboration not only strengthened the evidence, but also fostered a sense of shared purpose among those committed to exposing the darker side of wildlife exploitation. Adding another layer to the unfolding drama, a series of anonymous social media posts started circulating under the hashtag Silent Suffering. These posts featured grainy photos, eyewitness accounts, and cryptic messages that described encounters with injured wildlife in other parts of the region. One post, in particular, caught Jack's attention. It detailed a near-identical scenario involving a deer with precise, unnaturally inflicted wounds. The recurring nature of these reports suggested that Spirit's case was part of a systemic issue rather than an isolated incident. As these digital threads grew, online communities began forming alliances with local activists, and discussions about the exploitation of wildlife became a powerful movement in their own right. Amid the digital buzz, an unexpected character entered the picture, a reclusive local historian named Mr. Redmond, known for his encyclopedic knowledge of the region's past. Mr. Redmond had spent decades collecting records and oral histories about the area's wildlife and local legends. When he learned about Spirit's case, he reached out to Jack with a treasure trove of archival documents. Among these were old newspaper clippings and municipal reports from the 1970s that detailed similar patterns of animal mistreatment, allegedly linked to a notorious local businessman. Mr. Redmond explained that during that era, there had been a series of unsolved cases involving deliberate injuries to wildlife, all of which were quietly hushed up by those in power. His findings provided historical context to the current investigation, suggesting that the exploitation of the wild had deep, systemic roots in the region's past. At the same time, Officer Ryan found himself increasingly drawn into the emotional undercurrents of the case. Once a by-the-book enforcer, Ryan's empathy had grown as he witnessed Spirit's gradual recovery and the mounting evidence of deliberate harm. In late-night conversations with his partner, he confessed that the case had forced him to confront his own beliefs about the balance between law enforcement and compassionate intervention. "Every time I see Spirit's determined eyes, I'm reminded that our duty isn't just to enforce the law, but to protect those who cannot protect themselves," he said. Ryan's evolving perspective began to influence his colleagues as well, with several officers expressing a newfound commitment to supporting the investigation beyond their usual protocols. In the midst of these developments, community meetings grew increasingly animated. At one such gathering held at the local community center, residents debated passionately the implications of the new evidence. Heated discussions ranged from calls for immediate legal action against those responsible for the exploitation to pleas for a broader reform in wildlife protection policies. One influential local activist, Miss Johnson, argued that the community must not only hold the perpetrators accountable, but also implement long-term measures to safeguard the natural world from further abuse. "This isn't just about one wounded animal," she declared. "It's about changing the way we value and protect all life in our environment." These meetings served as a melting pot for various perspectives, from scientific analyses presented by Dr. Torres and Mr. Redmond's historical insights to the grassroots outcry voiced by local activists. The diversity of viewpoints enriched the investigation, encouraging a multidisciplinary approach that balanced emotion with evidence. As more individuals from different walks of life contributed their knowledge and experiences, the case of Spirit evolved into a symbol of resistance against systemic cruelty, a call for the community to reclaim its responsibility towards nature. Even as tensions mounted, Jack and his collaborators remained determined to document every nuance. Field trips into the forest became regular, each expedition uncovering new clues, like unusual patterns in the terrain or previously unnoticed marks on trees. These painstaking efforts not only expanded the evidence base but also deepened the personal connections among the team members, forging bonds of trust and shared commitment. Thus, the emerging subplots from the scientific insights of Dr. Torres, the meticulous documentation by Sarah, the historical revelations from Mr. Redmond, and the impassioned debates in community forums wove together a complex narrative. Spirit's suffering was no longer an isolated incident, but part of a broader tapestry of deliberate exploitation. The convergence of these diverse threads heightened the urgency of the investigation, setting the stage for a final, decisive confrontation with those responsible. As the investigation progressed and more evidence of deliberate exploitation emerged, the tension surrounding Spirit's case reached an unbearable peak. What began as a personal mission to save a wounded wolf had now morphed into a full-blown struggle against a hidden network of cruelty, a system that had exploited the vulnerable under the guise of progress and profit. The growing chorus of scientific analyses, historical accounts, and grassroots outcry had united diverse factions of the community, but it also exposed deep divisions between those demanding immediate retribution and those insisting on a cautious, systematic inquiry. At a specially convened town hall meeting, held in the packed auditorium of the local community center, heated debates echoed off the walls. Wildlife experts, local activists, law enforcement officials, and even a few skeptics gathered to discuss the disturbing findings. Dr. Torres, the university professor, who had meticulously documented patterns of unusual injuries in local wildlife, presented her data with measured authority. "The evidence indicates a disturbing consistency," she stated, her voice calm yet resolute, suggesting that Spirit's injury and similar wounds we've observed in other animals are not random occurrences, but part of a calculated operation. Her words resonated with many, yet they also fanned the flames of public anger. Among the impassioned speakers was a local activist, Ms. Johnson, whose eyes glistened with tears as she recounted her own experience of loss due to animal neglect. "This isn't just about one wolf," she cried. "It's about a system that treats life as disposable. We must stand together and demand that those responsible are held accountable." Her plea was met with resounding applause from a section of the audience that had long felt marginalized by the indifference of powerful elites. However, not everyone shared the same fervor. A group of local officials and some pragmatic community members warned that, while the evidence was deeply troubling, any reaction must be tempered by careful investigation. "We must ensure our actions are based on irrefutable evidence," argued a council member, his tone measured and cautious. Rushing to judgment without complete documentation could lead to unintended consequences. This insistence on procedural caution created a palpable schism in the room, a battle between raw emotional outrage and the need for methodical, legal action. Amid these conflicting voices, an anonymous email signed Hope's Keeper arrived on the town hall's public address system, its cryptic message piercing through the heated debate. "When cruelty is masked by power, the truth will not remain hidden. Seek the path where shadows meet light, and justice will be revealed." Accompanying the message was a blurry photograph of Spirit near a remote section of the forest where unusual disturbances had been previously recorded. This chilling missive lent a new urgency to the discussion, suggesting that the exploitation ran deeper than anyone had suspected. Officer Ryan, who had evolved from a strictly rule-bound enforcer to a compassionate advocate for the vulnerable, rose to speak. His transformation had been one of the most remarkable aspects of the unfolding saga, and his voice now carried the weight of hard-won empathy. "I have seen the anguish in Spirit's eyes," he declared, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions evident on his face, "and I believe that the suffering we're witnessing is a symptom of something far more insidious, a system that uses cruelty as a tool for control. We must act, not only to save this creature, but to dismantle the network that preys on the defenseless." His words struck a deep chord among the attendees, bridging the gap between scientific caution and moral imperative. As the debate raged, Jack, whose painstaking investigations had uncovered the deliberate nature of the injury, presented his final compilation of evidence. Photographs of the precise claw marks, the torn fragment of a high-tech tracking device, and detailed maps marking the unusual footprints were laid out before the community. "Every piece of evidence," Jack asserted, "is a testament to deliberate cruelty, a cruelty that was not a random act of nature, but a calculated exploitation. We have a duty to expose this network and protect every life it endangers." His passionate speech, filled with raw determination, pulled even the most skeptical members into the gravity of the situation. At that critical moment, the room fell into a heavy silence as the full magnitude of the evidence settled over everyone present. The anonymous tip, the corroborated testimonies of former employees, and the scientific analyses all converged into one undeniable conclusion. The deliberate injury to Spirit was part of a broader, systemic pattern of exploitation, orchestrated by individuals who wielded power behind a facade of philanthropy. The community now faced a moral crossroads: either allow this darkness to continue unchecked, or mobilize a unified response that would demand accountability and systemic change. In the final minutes of the meeting, a consensus began to emerge. A motion was passed to form an independent investigative task force, a coalition of wildlife experts, legal professionals, community activists, and empathetic law enforcement officers led by Officer Ryan and Jack. This task force would be charged with pursuing every lead, documenting every detail, and ultimately bringing those responsible to justice. The decision was not made lightly. It was a solemn pledge to stand up for every living creature that had been exploited and to restore the delicate balance between humanity and nature. As the meeting adjourned, the air outside was thick with anticipation. The storm had eased to a persistent drizzle, and the first light of dawn hinted at the promise of a new beginning. In that moment of collective resolve, the community vowed that the call for justice, echoed in every anguished cry of spirit and every impassioned plea in the hall, would not go unanswered. As the investigation into Spirit's deliberate injury reached its culmination, the community found itself standing on the edge of a definitive confrontation, a moment when every shred of evidence, every whispered testimony, and every emotional outcry coalesced into a single unyielding demand for justice. Under a slate-gray sky, with the forest still damp from the recent storm, Jack, Officer Ryan, and their allies gathered in the clearing that had become the symbolic epicenter of their struggle. The clearing, dominated by an ancient oak whose gnarled branches stretched toward the dark heavens, now served as the backdrop for this final showdown. On a weathered wooden table laid out before them were all the accumulated pieces of evidence. High-resolution photographs of the precise claw marks etched into the soft earth, the torn fragment of a high-tech tracking device, and detailed maps indicating unusual activity zones in the forest. Each item was a testament to the calculated cruelty inflicted on Spirit, evidence that could no longer be dismissed as random misfortune. Jack stepped forward, his voice steady yet charged with raw emotion. "Every piece of evidence here confirms what we suspected from the very beginning," he declared. "Spirit's injury wasn't an accident of nature. It was a deliberate act, an exploitation designed to send a message. We now know that someone, or a network of individuals, has been systematically harming our wildlife for profit and control." His words resonated with the assembled group, drawing nods and murmurs of agreement from wildlife experts, community activists, and empathetic law enforcement officers alike. Officer Ryan, whose journey from detached enforcer to compassionate advocate had become emblematic of the entire investigation, took his place beside Jack. "We cannot let this cruelty continue unchecked," he said, his tone resolute. "This case isn't just about one wounded animal. It's about dismantling a system that treats life as disposable. Our duty is to expose this exploitation, hold the perpetrators accountable, and ensure that no other creature suffers the same fate." His impassioned plea bridged the gap between cold, empirical evidence and the deep, human outrage that had grown throughout the community. At that moment, a local investigative journalist, Mark Rivera, presented a final dossier, a compilation of internal memos, anonymous testimonies from former employees, and financial records that linked the notorious local businessman to a network of illegal wildlife operations. "This dossier," Mark explained, "clearly shows a history of systematic abuse and exploitation. The evidence isn't circumstantial. It's damning. We are looking at a deliberate, orchestrated campaign to profit from the suffering of vulnerable creatures like Spirit." His voice trembled with controlled anger as he detailed how the businessman's public image of philanthropy masked a ruthless agenda. The atmosphere in the clearing became electric as the weight of Mark's revelations settled over everyone present. A heated debate ensued among the group. Some activists demanded immediate legal action against the businessman, calling for swift retribution to serve as a deterrent. Others, more cautious, argued that a meticulous, independent investigation was necessary to ensure that every facet of this systemic exploitation was thoroughly documented before any punitive measures were taken. After long, impassioned discussions, a consensus emerged from the heated debate. The assembled task force, comprising Jack, Officer Ryan, Mark Rivera, wildlife experts, and community activists, decided on a dual-pronged approach. They would file formal legal complaints using the overwhelming evidence they had gathered, while simultaneously launching an independent investigation to uncover the full scope of the exploitation network. This combined strategy was designed not only to bring the responsible parties to justice, but also to create a lasting framework for protecting vulnerable wildlife and holding power to account. With the decision made, Officer Ryan addressed the group one final time. "We stand united in our commitment to justice," he declared, his voice ringing with determination. "Today we take the first step in dismantling a system that has allowed cruelty to thrive. Our work will be rigorous, our demands unwavering, and our compassion will be our guiding light. Spirit's suffering will not be in vain. His words were met with a collective, resolute murmur, a promise that the fight for justice had truly begun. As the meeting drew to a close, the group dispersed into the cool, rain-washed night, each person carrying the weight of the decision and the hope of a more compassionate future. Jack lingered in the clearing, gazing at the ancient oak and the evidence spread before him. In that silent, reflective moment, he felt the enormity of their mission, a mission to expose hidden cruelty, to dismantle corrupt systems, and to restore dignity to every life that had been treated as expendable. In the final moments before the group parted ways, an almost imperceptible ray of light broke through the heavy clouds, a symbolic promise of a new beginning. With the evidence secured and a clear plan in place, the community's resolve was unshakable. The battle against systemic cruelty was now a shared endeavor, and every individual present knew that the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. Yet, buoyed by their collective strength and the memory of Spirit's silent plea for justice, they stepped forward together into the uncertain dawn, ready to confront the darkness and bring the truth into the light. As the independent task force set their plan into motion, the atmosphere in the community shifted from one of intense confrontation to a determined quest for resolution. In the days following that pivotal meeting in the forest clearing, Jack, One Officer Ryan and Mark Rivera, and their allies meticulously compiled every shred of evidence into a comprehensive report. Every photograph of the deliberate claw marks, every fragment of the tracking device, and every torn piece of fabric was organized with precision. The evidence was irrefutable, a damning indictment against the hidden network of exploitation that had inflicted such cruelty on Spirit. On the morning of the final confrontation, the town hall was filled with a hushed but resolute crowd. Local authorities, now under significant public pressure, had agreed to review the task force's findings. In a packed auditorium, community members, animal welfare advocates, and local media gathered for a press conference that promised to unveil the results of the investigation. Officer Ryan took the stage first. His voice, once cool and detached, now carried the weight of deep empathy and firm resolve. After months of investigation, we have uncovered a disturbing pattern of deliberate cruelty that goes far beyond this single incident, he declared. The evidence shows that Spirit's injury was not an unfortunate accident, but a calculated act of exploitation, perpetrated by individuals hiding behind a polished public image. Today we stand united, not only to hold those responsible accountable, but to demand systemic change that protects our wildlife and our community from such predation. As Ryan spoke, Mark Rivera stepped forward to present the final dossier. With a confident tone, he revealed the internal memos, leaked testimonies, and financial records that connected the notorious local businessman to a network of illegal wildlife operations. These documents confirm what we have long suspected, Mark stated, his voice resonant with controlled anger. This is not an isolated case, but part of a broader, deliberate campaign to exploit nature for profit. We now have the tools to bring this hidden cruelty into the light. The room was silent as the weight of the revelations sank in. A sense of catharsis filled the space, a collective exhalation after months of anguish and uncertainty. Local animal welfare groups, who had organized rallies and vigils in support of Spirit, cheered softly, their eyes glistening with tears of relief and hope. The evidence presented was not merely a call for retribution, but a promise of renewal. It was a turning point for the community, a moment when decades of neglect could finally be addressed. In the final moments of the press conference, a representative from the task force, a respected local lawyer named Mr. Ellis, outlined the next steps. "We will be filing formal complaints and launching legal proceedings against those implicated," he assured the audience. "Moreover, we will continue to work with both wildlife experts and community leaders to establish safeguards that ensure such exploitation never happens again." This initiative is not just about punishing the guilty. It's about transforming our approach to conservation and protection. As the press conference concluded, the community's resolve was palpable. In the days that followed, local authorities began an independent investigation, and a series of hearings were scheduled to scrutinize the actions of the implicated businessmen and his network. The collective outcry led to the creation of new policies aimed at safeguarding wildlife, including stricter regulations on the use of technology in monitoring animals and increased penalties for deliberate acts of cruelty. Jack Ita, whose journey had started with a solitary act of kindness, found himself at the center of a broader movement for justice. He continued to document the investigation in his journal, his entries now filled with a mixture of somber reflection and cautious optimism. Today, he wrote, "We have taken the first decisive step toward ending the exploitation that has haunted our wilderness. Spirit's pain has not been in vain. In our fight for justice, we are reclaiming not just his dignity, but the promise that every vulnerable life deserves protection and respect." In a poignant, final moment, Officer Ryan visited the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center where Spirit was receiving care. As he watched the wounded wolf slowly begin to heal, his eyes filled with gratitude and determination. "This," he murmured quietly, "is the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where cruelty is met with accountability and where compassion triumphs over exploitation." The community, now more united than ever, embraced the changes with renewed spirit. Social media buzzed with messages of hope under hashtags like "Justice for Spirit" and "Renew the Wild," and local newspapers carried stories that celebrated the power of collective action. A palpable sense of renewal began to spread, as residents recognized that their unified stand could pave the way for systemic change, a transformation that would honor the memory of every life exploited by greed. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey of justice, resilience, and transformation. If Spirit's story and the courageous efforts of our community have touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, like this video, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We invite you to stand with us as we continue to fight for those who cannot speak for themselves and work towards a world where every life is cherished and protected. Stay tuned for more inspiring stories that illuminate the profound connections between humanity and the natural world. Together, let's be the change that brings light to the darkest corners.